public statement by the announcing ISCO's intention to work with the IFRS Foundation in developing a plan to establish a new board for setting sustainability reporting standards that meet the needs of the capital markets. This comes as a recognition of the importance of the public interest for reporting standards that address enterprise value, which captures expected value creation for investors in the short, medium, and long term, and is interdependent with value creation for society and the environment. The market expects a final statement to be made by the IFRS Foundation on the new board in advance of the November 2021 United Nations COP26 conference. During the session, we hear from experienced ESG practitioners and capital market professionals on the importance of ESG reporting and visibility towards the rating agency. Today, we will be joined by Mr. Lee White, Executive Director of IFRS Foundation. Mr. White has joined the IFRS Foundation as Executive Director in April 2018 and carries more than 30 years of experience from the private sector and public authorities in Australia. Prior to joining IFRS Foundation, he was the inaugural Chief Executive Officer of Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. Where he played a central role in bringing together Australian and New Zealand chartered accountant bodies to form CANZ in 2014. We'll also be joined by Elena Filipova, Director of Sustainable Finance at Refinitiv and ex-technical expert group on Sustainable Finance, European Commission. Elena is responsible for the ESG business, products and services at Refinitiv on LSEG business. She brings together more than 15 years of professional experience in the ESG space. And Elena was a repertoire for the benchmark groups of the EU Technical Expert Group on Sustainable Finance appointed by the European Commission. We'll also be joined by William Tuhami, Senior Regional Head of MENA CFA Institute. William Tuhami is a Senior Regional Head of Middle East and North Africa at CFA Institute and is based in the new CFA Institute office in Abu Dhabi. In his role, William advocates for the higher standard of practice and ethics in the investment management industry through the promotion of financial market integrity and transparency among regional players, among regional policymakers and regulators. William's previous experience included Director of Institutional Development at Lazard and Director of Middle Eastern Institutions at Alliance Bernstein Middle East. I'll now open the floor to Mr. Lee White, Executive Director of IFRS Foundation, who will provide us with more insights on the IFRS Foundation efforts on standardization of sustainability-related disclosure to equip investors. Mr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marwa, and thank you for that introduction, but as importantly as well, thank you for the invitation to engage with the Arab Federation of Exchanges. So it gives me great pleasure to do that. Sally, if we could go on to the next slide, please. Sally? Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So colleagues, let me just give a little bit of context before I get right into the detail about sustainability, but about the IFRS Foundation. Some of you may or may not know about us, but we are a not-for-profit organisation. We are headquartered in London, but basically we provide standards that are currently used in over 140 jurisdictions around the globe. We're here to serve the public interest, and we do that by developing standards, financial reporting standards, that bring that sense of transparency, accountability, and efficiency to the capital markets. Thank you, Sally. So let me go from who we are then into starting giving a sense around sustainability reporting. And so I'm really trying to give you some context of where the foundation has been on a journey in the last 9 months or so. And around this time last year, we were starting to develop a consultation paper, which we released in late September of 2020. But what that was capturing was an assessment of the current situation at that time. We could see that there was very much a growing and urgent demand for sustainability related disclosures. We could see that there was a supply side in transition, and many of you might be familiar with, there's been the work by the TCFD, by the SASB, the IIRC, and so forth. So there was a growing number of organisations all doing very outstanding work, but all with their own particular focus. And therefore, we saw that this supply side was starting to change and in a level of transition. But importantly, there was certainly a need for consistency in the way this information was being reported. And importantly, the light on the hill was this comparable information because it had been consistently prepared. Thank you, Sally. So as I mentioned, during the fourth quarter of 2020, the Foundation trustees put out a consultation paper, and that really was starting to delve into whether there was demand for global sustainability related standards. If so, that demand was there. Should the IFRS Foundation play a role? And what would that role look like and feel like? And that was most likely in the form of the creation of a new board, which would exist already within the governance of the IFRS Foundation. Thank you, Sally. And importantly, the trustees outlined what was seen to be the key requirements for success. So if the global demand was there for these form of sustainability related standards, and that there was a sense that the foundation should play a role through the creation of a new board, sitting side by side with the current ISB producing the financial reporting standards, then on this slide, it was clear that these were the types of requirements for success that needed to be met in order for the trustees to progress to, as Marwa was saying in her introductory remarks, to getting to an announcement at COP26 in November of this year. And I won't go through each of them, but obviously you could see that there was a need for global support, importantly to work with regional initiatives, technical expertise, because this is different to the setting of financial reporting standards, and importantly making sure that there is appropriate funding available. Next slide, thank you, Sally. So the trustees earlier this year then went through the analysis of the responses to that consultation paper, and they were therefore able to set out some fairly clear strategic direction. So clearly there was a growing and urgent demand for, as I said earlier, this consistency of reporting to lead to global comparability. And there was broad support, albeit conditional, for the foundation to play a role. So the trustees, using the feedback, very much focused on 4 points of strategic direction. The first was really looking at standards that would be there to meet the investor needs, and particularly, as it was said earlier, about the enterprise value focus. Secondly, that it would develop a global baseline of standards that then could be utilised by different regions that wish to go further and faster than where the foundation would be able to produce the baseline standards. There was very strong encouragement for the trustees to develop, firstly, a prioritising on climate-related disclosure, but certainly as well encouragement to go further than climate into the other appropriate areas of ESG. And as well, finally, as I mentioned earlier about the supply side in transition, build upon the very good work that's already been undertaken by a number of these other organisations. And so that includes certainly the TCFD, the SASB, IIRC, the WEF and so forth. And a lot of significant work has already been happening in that area. And I'm pleased to say that we will, by COP26, have a very good prototype on climate that we would then be able to pass to the new board, and who can then go forward in the appropriate steps. Thank you, Sally. Now, I've mentioned some working groups and committees. It is a busy space. We're moving at pace, but we're moving in an orderly way as well. So again, just to give you some context, at a trustee level, we've got our own steering committee, which is chaired by Lucrezia Reichling. We have an eminent persons group, which is there to provide independent strategic advice and counsel to the trustees. And that's chaired by Jean-Claude Trichet. Jean-Claude was the previous president of the ECB. And we've got two groups headed up by trustees, both working with existing groups, as I mentioned earlier, in order to provide that running start. And secondly, we also have a multilateral working group as well. So lots occurring in a tight time frame. Thank you, Sally. Now, where are we at today? So we went from that strategic consultation paper of the fourth quarter of 2020. We received these conditional support. My apologies, somehow I was muted. And now here we are with a summary in effect of the feedback that the trustees received. And importantly, we are going through engagement on changes to our trustees' constitution. Both of these documents are on our website and available if anyone wishes to engage with them. My reach today, it would be to ask the colleagues on this call to consider whether their organisation would wish to do a response to the proposed amendments to the Constitution. Certainly there's sufficient time. There's still another month available if people wish to engage with those changes and encourage the Foundation to take appropriate steps if they believe they are appropriate. Thank you, Sally. So again, just to remind, this ties in a little bit with that earlier slide about who the Foundation is and how we're structured, but we actually have a three-tier governance structure. The group I've been talking mainly about has been the Foundation trustees. They're in the middle around governance strategy and oversight. I've spoken already about the two boards, the one on the left being the current ISB, which is producing financial reporting standards. The one on the right is the proposed new board that would deliver sustainability-related disclosure standards. And at the top, and many people aren't as aware of this, is that we have public accountability via the Foundation's monitoring board. Now, this monitoring board's actually chaired by IOSCO. It brings representation from the European Commission, the Chinese Ministry of Finance, the US SEC, and so forth. And it's this group that oversights the work of the Foundation's trustees and ultimately of the standard setting boards. And it was this structure that many in the consultation felt gave the right level of governance in order for the proposed new board to be housed within the Foundation. Thank you, Sally. So this proposed new ISSB, it would be similar in some ways to the current ISB. This is something that we're engaging, as I mentioned, about these changes to the Constitution, but it would be primarily a full-time board. It would have up to 14 members, a diverse range of qualifications, focused on delivering standards that meet the investors' needs. And importantly, as we've been able to show through the work of the ISB, a diversity in expertise and geographical balance. Now, if you'd like to learn more, as I said, have a look at those proposed changes to the Constitution. Thank you, Sally. Please don't feel you need to read this slide, but it was really just to give you a snapshot that as the trustees have moved through calendar year 2021, there's been a number of announcements that come through in order to provide the level of momentum and global support to the steps that the trustees are taking. And these are covering through from the G7, the Financial Stability Board, the US Secretary Yellen, and importantly, a number of announcements that have come out from IOSCO, and I believe will continue to come from IOSCO as well. We're shortly in preparation, or we are in preparation now, I should say, for the upcoming G20, which will be in Venice early next month. And so there is a real sense of momentum and support for the work that the foundation is undertaking. Thank you, Sally. Lovely. And this is something I just did want to pause on and give you a sense of the timeline and the steps that the trustees have been taking. So there we were in Q4 of 2020. I made reference earlier in my presentation to this consultation paper that was released. The first quarter of 2021, we saw feedback being delivered by the trustees and the strategic direction that they were taking in terms of the feedback they'd received to the consultation paper. That led in April 2021 to that document I referred to, the detailed feedback statement on the consultation paper. And secondly, these proposed amendments to the Constitution. So here we are right at the moment between May to July of 2021, where we've got our outreach occurring on proposed changes to the Constitution. Those responses will be analysed during that August to October period. And ideally, but it is still conditional, the trustees would then be able to make a determination at COP26 about the steps they've taken in order to set up a new board. Another encouragement from me today is that we currently have a executive search occurring, a global executive search for the chair and the vice chair of this proposed new board. So if anyone has views or ideas about that, they can either contact me at the foundation or directly to Egon Zender, who are undertaking the global search. Those contacts are again on our website. And finally, I think that's a segue into the next slide. Thank you, Sally. That if you wish to keep up to date with what's occurring, come onto our website, which is there at ifrs.org, sign in and register, set your follows, and there's an easy way in which you can keep yourself updated on the different announcements and keep yourself informed as the trustees move through this period to November of this year. So I may pause there and pass back to Marwa, please, and happy to take any comments or questions that people may wish to raise.
Thank you, Lee. That was very insightful, and certainly there has been great advancements since the consultation of Q4 2020 until today, and even more so until the upcoming November COP26 event. And we've seen various positive sentiments and statements being issued from the top, from the G7 finance ministers down to industry setting bodies, and that's a testament to the importance of the standardization of sustainability disclosures. I'd like to open the floor now to any participants who would like to pose any questions to Mr. Lee before we move on to our panel discussion. So we'll just give it a couple of minutes to see if anyone would like to either pose a question through the chat feature or through the raise hand feature. Please do so. Any questions for Mr. Lee? Please raise your hands and introduce yourself.
I didn't really get that.
Not really. So I guess we may expect, okay, there's one. Will the guideline cover country-wise and sector-wise standards? That's interesting.
Thank you very much for that question. It's probably a bit of yes and no at this stage, and please take this as an indicative direction rather than anything from the proposed new board. I think when it comes to sector, there's been some very good work that's been undertaken by the SASB, which is an organisation that's already been running in this space. They're now through a merger with called now the Value Reporting Foundation, but they've certainly developed a lot of metrics for approximately 70 to 80 industries. And I think it would be very important for that new board that I've spoken about to really think about the way that work can be leveraged in order to provide greater sense of comparability at industry level. So my sense is that direction is very much the case. When it comes to country, I think the global baselines will try and deliver something that is not necessarily country specific, but available for all jurisdictions to be able to adopt and use. I believe where the country specific will then come in is different jurisdictions will consider what's also important for them in their own jurisdiction and may very well add on to the baseline standards for what their needs are in those jurisdictions.
Thank you. There's another question which is similar to the previous question, but I'll just slightly rephrase it. As a healthcare company, you're trying to understand which benchmark would be in line, or which most suitable benchmark would be in line with our standards to incorporate. So basically, based on the industry, which standard should we be following?
Well, I think today you've got an opportunity to follow a number, but that's where in effect the difficulty lies, is that everyone might be using slightly different guidance at this time. I think the ideal situation is to look at the TCFD. TCFD has certainly brought a lot of consistency to a level of reporting, but that is still at a fairly high level of framework, and it's something that we will be building upon as we move forward. I think to watch what the new board would do will then allow industries such as healthcare to start providing more industry specific, which we would then build upon. So I think today it's still unfortunately a little bit loose, but I'd encourage certainly to look at TCFD. And I think as we move forward, we will be able to build upon more of the industry specific guidance as well.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. I think we don't have any more questions, so we will now move on to the next panel. Appreciate your inputs, Mr. Lee, and thank you for those insights. And I look forward to the statements to be issued in November. It will surely be a positive advancement to the industry.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Moa. Thank you for the kind invitation. And if at any time the Federation would wish me to re-engage to either give an update or further information, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I wish you well.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
We will now move on to our next discussion, which will be a panel discussion. I'd like to welcome Elena Filipova, Global Head of Refinitiv for Sustainable Finance, and William Tahami, Senior Regional Head of MENA CFA Institute. We'll start with William. William, if you can please provide the audience with a brief about the current standards being prepared by the CFA Institute on the ESG investment products, and how will that complement the current efforts on enhancement of ESG rating agencies and providing increased transparency to the market?
Thank you, Marwa, and thank you for the Arab Federation of Exchanges for the kind invite. Back to your question. So the purpose of the ESG Disclosure Standards for investment products by CFA Institute, the purpose is to provide greater transparency and comparability for investors by enabling asset managers to clearly communicate the ESG-related features of their investments or their investment products. Therefore, the standards will be useful to asset owners when they are evaluating predefined investment vehicles or strategies or separately managed accounts and partnerships offered by external managers. Additionally, the standards may be useful when selecting managers for bespoke mandates, insofar that investment products disclosures can be helpful to understand managers' capabilities. So the ESG disclosure standards for investment products apply to investment product disclosures, but unlike SASP or GRI or TCFD that have been mentioned already, which apply to corporate ESG and sustainability reporting. So more specifically, our standards cover aspects of investment strategies like objectives, constraints, policies, and methods that are related to ESG factors and issues, and do not cover disclosures of holdings on ongoing periodic reporting. These topics may be addressed in a later version of the standards, we hope. So the ESG disclosure standards are to be used by investment managers on a product-by-product basis. No investment manager will be able to claim compliance at the entire organization, like GIPS and other standards. They will be able, investment managers will be only able to claim compliance at the product level. So in summary, and back to the core of the question, I believe that these standards do complement the current effort of enhancements of ESG rating agencies, since they help the investor to make sure that the constituents of the corporates or the investments are ESG rated. And then at the investment solution level, the portfolio manager or the investment manager followed a thorough process of investigating and then selecting ESG compliant names. I hope this addressed the question.
So just to clarify to the audience, the current industry standards are mainly catered towards the corporate issuers on how to disclose, while the standards currently being prepared by the CFE Institute is on the product side, on the investing side. So how should investors and data providers and exchanges cooperate with companies to increase and enhance the ESG data disclosure?
The short answer would be through standard setting organizations. So companies are currently inundated with different requests from different stakeholders. What is really needed today at this point is for everyone to come together and hammer out a standard. There are lots of standard setting bodies working on this problem. The leading effort is by far the IFRS initiative that we just heard Mr. Lee about this topic. So the setup of Sustainable Standards Board that sits alongside the IASB. So the IFRS effort includes all the major sustainability standard setters, including SASP, IRC, who have merged and are now the Value Reporting Council, if I'm not mistaken, GRI, TCFD, and CPD. So this is where the standard setting organizations can really support the industry.
And from the perspective of ESG data issues, such as transparency of rating methodologies, comparability of various rankings, and data availability, how do these impact the asset managers?
I'm inclined to say comparability is not really an issue here. Asset managers recognize that different data providers offer different models with different ways and different factors. Now, asset managers generally select the provider or the model that is best for their strategies and products. So they select what's suitable for them. Transparency is a bit more of a problem here. If an asset manager doesn't know the weights of various factors and or more generally the structure and workings of the model, they cannot evaluate if the model is appropriate for their needs. So the issue of rating comparability and transparency is more of a problem for end investors. Typically, they are not steeped in these nuances, the clients and the end investors. So there's a belief that ESG ratings should be as consistent as credit ratings. In my opinion, that will never be the case. And I hope to be wrong here. Credit worthiness is a much more tightly defined concept and experimented and used for decades now, if not centuries. Now, sustainability is much less so. People value different things differently, and I expect there will continue to be many rating models to choose from. What end investors need to figure out is what is important for them and for their clients and their portfolios and for their objectives.
Thank you, William. I think everyone is looking forward to the major statements being issued by the IFRS and IOSCO, because that will certainly help drive forward the ESG landscape as a whole and make it much more tighter control, as you mentioned. So let me bring up now Elena into the conversation and get more insight from the perspective of data providers, Elena. So from your perspective as data providers, what are the key sustainability disclosure challenges in terms of convergence efforts, and how is the industry tackling this challenge to address the key gaps?
Thank you, and thanks to the Federation for having me at this very important and timely conversation. And thanks to everyone for joining the conversation today. I think a lot of important points have been mentioned so far, but let me just make two additional points before I jump into your specific question, if I may. I think the first thing to for the audience to understand is that sustainability has really grown phenomenally globally in the last couple of years. The pace of change is extremely rapid, and the business case for sustainability is now very clear, whereas it used to be a very debatable question a few years ago. To give you an example why I say the case is very clear, this year alone, we have seen more than $1 trillion of AUM attracted by sustainable funds. And this is the highest level that has been experienced by the market thus far. There are lots of drivers for this. Some we've already discussed today, but the industry is rapidly changing. So it is very important to understand the change and understand how it impacts your organization, wherever in the value chain of the business you may sit. And the second very important point to highlight is the fact that this change is bringing on board everyone, including the public sector, and everyone has a very critical role to play, starting with companies, businesses, organizations, investors, stock exchanges, but also policymakers. And the role of policymakers is becoming more evident with some of the leading initiatives at the global level that may establish the blueprint for the market, like those led by the European Commission or the UK. But we really see that momentum that Mr. White spoke about at the beginning from around the globe, including US and many Asian markets. Now, from a data provider perspective, the role that we play, and we've been servicing the financial market with ESG data for 2 decades now. So we've been seeing a very fundamental evolution that have been shaping across the global economy. And the role that we play is to power financial and investment decisions with the right data and insights to provide that connectivity and be able to make more informed investment decisions. So in the case of sustainable investments, most of the time is connecting companies, businesses, their strategies and performance and ambitions into financially understood KPIs, so that investors can take the data and incorporate it into traditional financial workflows. And I think that this is very important piece of the process that we're struggling with today, and we have been struggling with for a very long time. Because when we talk about sustainability, we really talk about issues which do not come intuitively to financial professionals. Even giving you an example, very basic things like units of reporting, energy consumption reported in megawatt hours. Well, how do you translate it into a monetary number that helps you assess better risks as well as opportunities, and which companies are managing those externalities more effectively? So this translation of non-financial units and numbers into financial metrics is what we believe is going to mainstream sustainability and enable financial markets to play the fundamental and critical role they ought to play in the transition of the global economy and our society to sustainability as well as resilient future. And therefore, I applaud the work that IFRS, IOSCO are leading in that agenda. We believe that they have a very important fundamental role to play. And I would repeat the comment mentioned from the beginning that ESG should sit side by side financial data and financial reporting. It absolutely should. And we've been advocating and making a lot of efforts as a data provider to bring it side by side to financial data, because this is what enables financial professionals to action on ESG metrics and considerations. So it is quite important.
Thank you, Alina. So as we mentioned earlier, we've seen those major statements by IFRS and the IOSCO, which is standard industry standard body for the capital markets, coming together to form this statement, which is an advancement to the ESG and sustainability agenda, which has been, as you mentioned, very fluid, but has been growing in terms of momentum. But what about the rating discrepancies? How are they important for both investors and the corporate managers? And what are the steps that must be taken to address the potential rating inaccuracies, but because that's where the gap falls in. So how are the data providers taking steps to address this gap? Because it's translating it from the non-financial to financial metrics and plugging into your traditional Excel sheets to address or assess that potential investment in a portfolio company.
Mm-hmm. That's indeed a great question, and one that we get asked from our customers regularly. As a data provider, we really enable our customers to differentiate their approaches, their products, their value creation to their end users and customers. And this is what data does. I mean, let me break my answer into two parts. First, let me zoom into ESG for a moment. We talk about ESG as it's a simple 10 items which are very consistent phenomena, and unfortunately it is not. ESG really encompasses a variety of fundamental challenges and shifts that our society is facing and has been facing for decades and will be facing for decades. Environmental issues and topics around climate change and biodiversity, nature-related risks as well as opportunities. Those are mega trends which take centuries to evolve, understand. They're based on science, and translating them into a risk model for a portfolio is a journey which requires a lot of understanding of data, global benchmarks, which do not always exist. In the case of climate, we're fortunate to have the global benchmark as outlined by the Paris Agreement and our 2050 trajectory. This is a global benchmark, which then every asset can be benchmarked against. But across other areas like nature, for example, or if we move into the social agenda, we do not have industry-wide global benchmarks. So that makes it very challenging to assess and quantify and produce one number, which then everyone agrees on. And the analogy which I think makes a lot of sense to make when challenged with the divergence of ESG assessments available in the market is the one with sell-side broker research recommendations. The inputs that go into the different ESG ratings are vastly the same. There are, of course, variances. There are different data sources that the different rating providers and data providers will use. But broadly speaking, the inputs are the same. At the heart of it is what companies make publicly available. And publicly available information currently is, broadly speaking, as a result of investor pressure. Therefore, investors play a very critical role in improving transparency and guiding companies on what information is financially material to them and encouraging them to make it publicly available. So sell-side broker research reports, although the financial inputs are standardized, there are global reporting standards, as we know, IFRS, GAAP, and so on, investors analysts come up with different recommendations and understanding of this data. This is the same analogy and phenomena that we experience with ESG data. Most of the inputs are the same, but for most part today, ESG ratings are not like credit ratings. They're analyst opinion, a subjective opinion on the ESG credentials of a business. And some ratings will put more emphasis on the product portfolio of companies and how ESG or sustainable they are. Others will put more emphasis on the actual operational performance of a business and its corporate governance credentials. And the variety of approaches goes on and on and on. We at Refinitiv have adopted a very objective approach, which is also different from what most of the other data providers do, which is subjective. Because we believe that ESG should sit side by side financial data, we believe that the analytics should also be data-driven. They should be objective, not the opinion of an analyst. But it gives you another view into ESG data. And from our experience, many customers actually would like to overlay it with their own know-how, with their own insights, and their own ambition of impact they want to drive for. So it is very unique, customer unique approach, which is still what we experience in the market across all regions, more mature or less mature from a sustainability perspective.
You've touched upon a very important topic, which is rarely discussed, which is the education and the skill gaps that investors have when it comes to understanding and dissecting those ESG ratings. So whose responsibility is it? Is it the data providers is it their responsibility to undertake and educate those investors on the dissecting this information, not just the corporates or the issuers, or how is that translated? Because that's a topic that's rarely discussed when it comes to ESG. We discuss about the conformity of standards, the ESG ratings, the corporate disclosures, but we don't discuss the education or the skill gaps in those areas.
No, you're absolutely right. And this is a key element of the whole process, really, that's rarely discussed, and it's very important to be acknowledged and tackled as well in parallel. Most investor surveys around ESG integration and sustainability and what are the challenges that investors face, most of them produce as output one of the main challenges that investors quote for slowing down integration is data gaps. And this, we believe, as a data provider, is actually an excuse. It's an excuse because, as I hinted on, ESG data has different characteristics, different dimensions. And with any change, it comes in with a degree of pushback and reluctance from vast majority of mainstream investors and financial professionals, reluctance to change. And I think in this case, change is not only required, it is necessary to happen very urgently, not only for our society and the planet, but actually to sustain financial results as well. And actually, the bigger challenge that we've seen in working with the financial industry for more than 2 decades now is the gap in knowledge. Organizations that have internal expertise around sustainability make a lot of different sustainability-related products, which perform exceptionally well as well on financial performance, and have been very successful in doing that for quite some time, which is a testament to the fact that there is definitely enough data. I don't want to undermine the challenges in the data space. There are certainly challenges related to data gaps, to standardization, and therefore we support the convergence initiatives that we see in the market and discussed at the beginning of today's session. But I think it's equally important to try to solve for the educational challenges as well. And we work a lot with different universities to enable their curriculum with data and insights so that they can train the new entrants into the workforce to understand the issues around sustainability side by side, their financial competencies, because this is the future. The direction of travel has been set very clearly to all of us, and we have to learn how to walk this new pathway. There are numerous sustainability related courses offered by all financial institutions and universities. And I think it is important for all organizations to look within themselves and do that kind of analysis, gap analysis on skill set, and try to close those as quickly as possible. Because emergence of data is happening very quickly. There is already a lot of data, and it's only going to become more and more actionable for all of you to take the next steps.
Thank you, Lina. I do agree with you on the points in terms of the skill sets. As we've seen, a lot of universities have taken steps to initiate or to encompass sustainability metrics as part of their academic curriculum in order to produce a well-equipped workforce to undertake such roles in the future. But let me go back to one of your earlier comments about the subjective and objective methodologies and transparency of those rating reports. You mentioned that at Refinitiv we have clear reports while other data providers might not be very clear about their reporting or transparency of their methodology. Can you clarify more about that topic?
Sure. I mean, there are different approaches, as mentioned. We've advocated for transparency, starting from the companies all the way to the financial products. And I would emphasize the importance of the work of the CFA Institute as well, with the ESG reporting standards on financial products. Because the need for transparency is not only on issuers, on companies. The need for transparency goes across the full value chain. And data providers play a critical role in that aspect as well. For us at Refinitiv, it's an easy thing to support, because our data services have been built around the concept of transparency and objectivity for 20 years, as mentioned. But now that regulation and regulatory and compliance pressures are starting to impact companies and financial institutions, the need for transparency, auditability, and justification is at its highest point, and it's continuously growing. If a benchmark and index is created and claims to have sustainability considerations, or a fund, it is now pretty much obliged to disclose how ESG is integrated, what is the impact of that portfolio, whether that's a fund or an index, and how it's meeting the needs of consumers or customers. Because especially here in Europe, but as mentioned everywhere else, the changes across the financial value chains are happening and touching on all market participants, including end consumers, where financial institutions will soon have to include sustainability considerations in the initial assessment survey of customers. And will have to have the right portfolio of sustainability products on their books to meet the sustainability objectives of end users. So it is a journey for everyone, and my encouragement is really to embark on it as quickly as possible and to ask a lot of questions. This will help you not get afraid by the fact that we see divergence across ESG providers and their end assessments of companies. If you ask questions and you understand what you're obtaining, what information you're using, and ensuring that aligns with your objective. And as we mentioned, there is a sea of potential objectives one may choose to pursue. It's this match that is critically important to happen. And that happens through asking the right question. Do not assume that ESG is one thing and it's one thing for everyone.
Thank you, Elena. That was very insightful. And now I'd like to open the floor for the audience for Q&A. Please drop your questions in the chat feature, or alternatively, you can use the raise hand feature and Sally will provide you with an option to open your mic. In the meantime, I do have questions to both of you. And William, we'll start with you. So in the formulation of the ESG global standards, why did the CFA Institute decide to go through the route of the consultation rather than doing their own research and publication?
Thank you, Marwa. So we know from experience that it's vital to have diverse perspectives in the formulation of any global standards. We've heard from IFRS in the beginning of this presentation. They also went the route of the consultation as a foundation. So as I said earlier, we were seeking input from individuals, groups, and organizations around the world in the form of comment letters, as well as individuals to participate as volunteers on our ESG committee. So CFA Institute gathered that wider feedback from the investment community to help shape the initial version of the ESG Disclosure Standards. The consultation paper was written with the help of 15 volunteers based in most regions, in different regions of the globe, sorry. These are asset owners, these are big asset owners, and most of them work also with asset managers. So we have this combination of, let's say, supply and demand within the investment management industry. And this makes the standards accepted globally later on, because they came from within the industry, trying to resolve issues within the industry with the input from the industry. And our standards will be voluntarily standards, so you can adopt them or not. But as a result of a global consultation, we hope that this will get it a wider acceptance. Thank you.
Thank you, William. And I haven't seen any questions coming up through the chat feature. Hence, I will close up the session, and I'd like to ask both Elena and William for your key takeaways on this topic in 30 seconds, please. Elena?
I think someone from the audience was trying to present a question. Or not. Sure, let me, I would like to make two comments. One on the CFA Institute standards. I was part of the ESG working group myself, and only can attest to the amazing collaboration at the global level that I've experienced for first time working on this together with the industry for the standards. And actually the output is so fascinating, because we speak about ESG and sustainability as it's quite complex topic. And I think CFA Institute does an exceptionally well in translating complex topics in very simple, clear ways. At least I would encourage everyone to read the documentation, because it will at least crystallize the ESG landscape to you in just a couple of pages. It's an excellent educational paper that I would encourage everyone to take a look at. And maybe I'll add a comment to the question that came in from the audience to Mr. White at the beginning of the session on which standard do we use? And we actually get that question a lot from companies that come to us as data provider and struggle with their own reporting initiatives. We actually enable them via our contributor tool to very quickly input the data that investors use. But Mr. White mentioned TCFD, and TCFD is indeed a great starting point for climate. So if climate is a material issue from the ESG spectrum to your organization, this is the best starting point. If you're working in industries where other issues are presenting bigger challenges for your business, I would encourage you to look at more global standards of reporting, like GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, or SASB, or the Value Reporting Foundation is most recently known and renamed, but also the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We have not mentioned them so far today, and I think that it's impossible to go through an ESG conversation without mentioning the UN SDGs. It's a great framework of 17 universal environmental and social challenges that our society faces. It's adopted by investors as well as issuers. So it's a great common framework to communicate with the same language. So that's another great starting point, regardless of the industry in which you operate. Back to you.
Thank you, Elena. William, any comments?
Yes, quick one. And thank you, Elena, for the feedback on the working groups. And thank you for being part of these volunteers who made the standards go the extra mile. The standards are now revised for the last time. And if you have still input, everyone on this call, if you read the document and you still have some feedback, we're still open for feedback till the 14th of July. Now, back to one of the comments that Elena mentioned about the AUMs and the assets that are coming to the ESG space. I can only notice one thing. 10 years ago, we used to go into presentations with one of my previous employers. I will not mention which one. As an asset manager, we used to go and meet asset owners in this part of the world. And the question was like, do you guys look at ESG? Today, you cannot submit any referral for proposal or RFP if you do not tick the ESG pages, not case. So, and this is thanks to the work of the consultants also. So today you cannot even be noticed on the screens if you do not tick several steps of you looking at ESG, respecting ESG. And one of the questions I like nowadays is, do you have an independent department that selects ESG compliant stocks or corporates or investments? And this department is independent, or it's part of your own investment team, which means, do you influence their selection, or you let them select freely what is ESG compliant, and then you start your work as a portfolio manager. You're free to manage ESG compliant names or not. You're free to have an ESG compliant strategy or investment solution or vehicle or not. But make sure you communicate with lots of transparency to your clients, saying those names have been tested and approved based on XYZ norms that they are ESG compliant. Then as an asset manager or a portfolio manager, I was giving the liberty to select out of 100 names that are ESG compliant. And I'm proud to sit in a region that's also doing lots of efforts, starting almost from nothing a couple of years back, and now being really leading the efforts of looking at ESG, try to comply, and make sure we have names in the region to select from. A final point on university students. I think this is where the hope is, because when we discuss with university students about any designation we have at the institute, their first question is like, what about ESG certificates? What is the percentage of ESG or sustainability or climate change in your curriculum? So these are the consumers of tomorrow. These are the investment managers of tomorrow. These are the industry leaders of tomorrow. Before studying anything, they're asking you, what is the proportion of ESG in your certificate or designation? If not enough, I will look at something else. So this is where hope is, and I'm really proud of universities in this part of the world challenging us and asking us to be really following the industry, not leading the industry in this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William. I think, yes, the landscape has certainly changed, has been impacted and driven by a lot of the millennials, as they are tomorrow's consumers, and impacting a lot of the decisions. We look forward to joint statements and consultation papers being issued, whether it's by the CFA Institute, whether it's by IOSCO and IFRS. This will help shape the future industry and the landscape of ESG in the MENA region and globally, of course. In the MENA, there has been lots of advancements. If we look at all the major capital markets at the exchange level, the market operators, they have issued their own voluntary ESG guidelines, and listed companies should be guided by those as a first line of referrals. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our panelists. And we look forward to your participation in future Arab Federation of Exchanges webinars. Goodbye for now. Thank you.